Hey folks, Tim with Old School Tips and Techniques. Thanks for checking in. John Word is on his way down from Lancaster Archery. He's going to sit down, go over the mental issues that folks run into with target panic. So hopefully you and I can learn a little tips to get us through the tough times. So we'll shoot a couple hours here. We're going to go inside, we're going to get started, and we'll be back in a second with you. So hey everybody, Tim's back here with Old School Tips and Techniques, sitting here with John Word, who ventured down an hour from his home to spend some time with all of us. So we're going to get into the mental aspects of target panic, bounce a few questions off of John, and hopefully again he can get us all pointed in the right direction. So John, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
And so your past experience, I know you mentioned to me, maybe confidentially, but we're going to get it out to everybody out there, that you yourself had also had and struggled with some of what I like to refer to as the demons of target panic.
Definitely, I haven't just had it. I would say I have target panic, and I think like a lot of people who compete in archery, I think most of them, if they've been competing for a long time, actually develop a certain degree of it. And I think the best archers and people who win at the highest levels are the ones that control their target panic the best. So I definitely struggle with it in practice and throughout tournament situations. But I think with that said, I think most guys who get to a high level of competition or spend a lot of time training will eventually develop it.
Yeah, I know. So it's really not something that is in the target world segmented to that side or the archery world, because you've spent a lot more time involved in target archery and you see it on a daily basis. And I'm on the other side, pretty much focused only on the hunting aspect in the 3Ds, but not from a target perspective of 3Ds, just for the fun. And I've constantly watched people struggle with it for the past 30 years that I've been playing this game. But so what are your thoughts as far as what steps early on in shooting a bow can somebody go through to try to prevent anything from creeping in?
Good question, and let me start even earlier than that. So I'll explain what I think are the best ways to cope with it and manage it, but just to give you a real quick description of how I started to learn about what it is and when it began to affect me. So I've shot instinctive and traditional bows for a long time, since I was like 16 years old. And for a little more than half that time, I was an instinctive archer, self-taught. A lot of what I learned came from the books that were available back in the 90s and the videos that were available in the 90s. And then I was living in Salt Lake City. I helped out and worked at Salt Lake Archery sometimes. And Salt Lake, with Easton and Hoyt being in Salt Lake and Gold Tip, it's a hub of archery competition. So I grew up shooting archery in my backyard in Salt Lake. I only got to really practice at the club and at the archery range. So I was around competitive archers a lot, starting back then in Salt Lake City. And I started doing some competitions. And through competing in field archery, 3D archery, and indoor archery, I started to study the sport of archery more. And that's when I learned that many of the traditional archers who I was competing against were using a kind of a more specific aiming system than what I was using. So they were they were setting up arrows in ways that would make indoor archery or field archery or 3D archery easier. So I started learning about these techniques and developing these techniques. In 2010, I started working at Lancaster Archery Supply. At that time, I met Paul Vogel and Jimmy Blackman, and these two taught me a ton about competing, taught me a ton about setting up a bow and learning to aim and stuff like that. And I also met Rod Jenkins that year, and Rod I still consider my coach in archery. So the techniques I learned from them became my system for aiming in archery, and I started competing at a higher level than I ever had. At the time I had a lot of goals to win a national championship, do all these things, and I was training most days of the week. I had the keys to Lancaster Archery Supply, so I could go in at midnight and shoot a couple hundred arrows if I want to, and I wasn't married at the time, so I spent a lot of time really developing and training pretty hard, much harder than I ever had, and I was taking the sport much more seriously, and that's when I learned what target panic was. And to put it very simply, target panic was I shot so many arrows that archery was very repetitive. I could go through a shot sequence, fluidly and without thinking too much about it. And what happens is when you're aiming the bow and you're using the tip of the arrow as a aperture or a point to aim with, as you bring the arrow tip close to the target that you're aiming at, as it approaches that point and begins to come close to that point where it's aimed correctly, your mind anticipates that as the cue to release the string and release the bow. And that feeling then becomes even more magnified when you get in a stressful situation like a hunting situation or a tournament you've been preparing for a long time. Target panic can at that point just take over you. So I've struggled with it so hard that even practice is difficult, but I manage it now where practicing I can shoot pretty well. In competition I still feel a lot of that panic feeling, and I have to really struggle to keep my body and my mind from anticipating the shot. And so what I would describe target panic as, or the way I've had it, is that your mind understands what it takes to complete an archery shot, and your cue to release the arrow is often with a bare bow. We don't have anything other than the sight picture and seeing that the arrow tip is aligned with the bullseye in the way it's supposed to be when I'm supposed to let go of the bow. So my mind uses that as a cue to let go, and my mind then begins to anticipate that, and it doesn't let me hold, aim, and finish a complete shot because it anticipates it, and I either get a little bit of a yip, or I may force myself to hold a little bit longer than I would, and I don't come off the string cleanly. But it's really just using the sight picture as your shot cue to let go of the string. And when you're gripped by that target panic feeling,
the anxiety of it, the anxiety of the whole process, it starts to build, and then after a while you start waiting for it to show its head.
Yes, you're expecting it. You're worried as you're going to a tournament that you're going to have it, and then you do because you were anticipating having target panic. So target panic's not fun, and it definitely takes the fun out of archery for a lot of people. It took a little bit of the fun out for me because as I was getting better and better and better, I didn't have it, and then eventually I got to a point where I realized that I did have it, and learning how to cope with that became the hardest thing because I know how to shoot a good shot. Rod Jenkins taught me a great shot sequence, and I know how to put my body in line for a good shot. I know what it requires to aim a bow, and the last thing is to simply be able to aim until you've completed the shot. That's the hardest part about archery, and I think in traditional and bare bow archery, without any aids or things to help you, I think that's the most difficult part of traditional and instinctive and bare bow archery.
So what are your thoughts on, a lot of people these days are using the feather to the nose, they're using clickers, or maybe a lot of times I use a string to the eyebrow, so they're using some type of outside trigger to let them know, hey, it's time.
I think that is the way to beat it. The feather to the nose or the string to your eyebrow, those are two important ways to fight against target panic when you're in a competition situation and you can't use a clicker.
Okay.
So the feather to the nose and the string to the eyebrow, or these other types of cues you can use that are still legal within the rules, are helpful in those situations. I think the most helpful thing is to put a clicker, a limb style clicker on a recurve bow. And I think for most bow hunters, if you've struggled with target panic, it's an amazing tool, and it will make you so much better at aiming and completing a shot if you learn how to use one.
If you learn it, and a lot of the times I know people run into problems with clickers. I think they're great because they teach an individual where their anchor point was, especially somebody that has maybe a tendency to short draw or not find a consistent anchor every time. It's showing them that, hey, it's here. Continue your back tension, maybe a little inhale, expand your chest, and it'll go off.
They do so many things really well. They help you to keep pulling through a shot. They help to make your anchor point more consistent than it's ever been. But the most important thing that a clicker does, and why it defeats target panic, is that without a clicker, all I have is the sight picture to tell me when to release the arrow. So you can try counting in your head. You can repeat a phrase or a mantra in your head. Some people hold an anchor and say, "God bless the Queen," before they release the arrow, and that gives you that moment of control over the shot while it's aimed correctly to finish your shot. But a lot of that doesn't work, but a clicker does. And at Lancaster Archery, we have some really competitive Olympic recurve shooters. These people have reached levels of accuracy and consistency that I've not come close to shooting my bows, because they've trained a lot harder than me. And their struggle with target panic taught me a lot more about the subject than I might have ever known, because I don't use sights, I don't shoot compounds, I don't shoot with a release. Seeing somebody who has a sight on their bow, who pulls through a blade style clicker, and then teaching them about traditional archery and aiming without a sight or a clicker, I learned that Olympic style recurve shooters who, the reason they have a blade clicker on a bow is to let them aim the bow, watching that aperture dance on the gold, and because they don't have to see the aperture perfectly lined up to know to release the string, what their cue to release the string is when they squeeze their back through the clicker and the point of the arrow falls behind the blade, and the blade springs tight against the riser, and they get that audible click and sensation. That's their cue to release the arrow. So what that does is that frees their mind from the anxiety that's created when the sight picture is our cue to release the arrow. So they can get lost in simply squeezing through the shot and watching that aperture dance on the bullseye, because they don't even have to think about letting go, because their body's going to let go when they pull through the clicker. Same thing with a limb-mounted clicker for a traditional archer, and that's what defeats target panic. Is it frees your mind from having to come up with a way to cue you to release. Absolutely.
Well, hopefully that'll give everybody a little bit broader knowledge of what we've been talking about between last week's video on the physical side and John, we're getting into a little bit more of the mental aspect. Do you have anything else that you need to add?
No, and it's hard to, a couple things just on how to manage it. And a couple things are learn to aim without shooting and shoot without aiming. Basically, holding drills. So a lot of competitors will start their practice session by drawing, anchoring, holding for 10 seconds, and either finishing the shot or not finishing the shot. Some people do it either way, but basically it's letting you see your arrow tip aligned where it's supposed to be on the target and not shoot. Some people will say go ahead and finish the shot after 5 or 10 seconds, and some people will say let it down. It's real hard to let down. With or without target panic. Your body doesn't want to go back around the corner, if you will. And then the other thing is a dedicated shot sequence, like Rod teaches. Basically, you break down archery into a lot of small pieces.
Okay.
Stop focusing on the result. Stop focusing on what's happening with the target. Focus on what you can control. You can control your stance. You can control the way you grip the bow. You can control your anchor point. If you focus here instead of down there, and also manage to force your mind to go through each step one at a time, it helps you forget about the anxiety that's created by archery. And I think having a good shot sequence, doing drills where you shoot without aiming and aim without shooting. I didn't finish that idea. Shoot without aiming is basically just doing blank bailing, standing in front of the target.
We talked about that.
Don't aim anything. Just go through your shot sequence. So you learn how to let the string go without having some visual cue telling you to do it.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're not trying to take this and make it so complex that we take the fun out of it. All we're trying to let everybody out there know is, hey, these are some of the issues and the hurdles that you run into in traditional archery, and when you start, seeing them coming along your journey, there are ways out. There are people like John to talk to. Lancaster Archery is a fantastic supplier, one of the largest in the country. John Word is very easily reachable. If you're looking to get in traditional archery, they've got several entry-level bows up to some of their, beautiful Titan ILF type bows, where we talked about before being able to tier limbs as you come into the sport and move up in poundage, maybe 5 pounds a month until you kind of find the poundage that you're looking for that particular goal that you have set in traditional archery. But if you're looking for something, please give John a call, give Lancaster Archery a call. We appreciate him taking the time to come down here and to share some of this information. And just a quick step forward, the next video, we're going to get an ILF from Lancaster Archery, one of their Titans. We're going to do a walkthrough of how to put it together, how to get it set up, and hopefully get everybody pointed in the right direction. So thank you, John. I appreciate you stopping in. And guys, very reachable. Give him a call. Lancaster Archery. Thanks very much.